Tonight's program on chemical dependency in the family will be presented by Dr. Lynn Kleiman Malinoff. Lynn has worked with challenged youth and their families for over 35 years in a variety of capacities and roles. She is currently the director of Eastern Michigan University's 21st Century Community Learning Center's Bright Futures out-of-school programs. So please help me welcome Lynn.
Okay, so first, testing. Can you hear me in the back? Because I can't tell. Is the mic working? Okay, good. Good evening, everybody. What time did you all get up? I got up at 5:30. I've had some caffeine. I should rest. It's great to be here. I really thank Jess for all the organizing work that she does. She works really hard to make sure that everything's in place so we can give these talks. And to Dawn Farm for organizing all this. This is my third time giving this talk. If you've been to all three, I think you're going to hear some things that sound really familiar and maybe even see some familiar slides. It'd be interesting if you stay late, if you actually are on your second or third time with this, because I'd be curious to hear if it sounds different after you've had a year to think about it, right? I'm going to start out by telling you just a little bit about myself so I can qualify myself for giving this talk. First of all, my area of expertise is education. I spent about 15, 16 years in alternative high school where 90+% of our kids had an alcoholic or drug-dependent parent, and they were my teachers. I mean, I also got educated in all this stuff, but really they were my teachers. And I also took a brief hiatus from the schools and ran a treatment program for adolescents, the first adolescent day treatment program in the state, actually, which was great and interesting because adolescents are really hard to treat, and a lot of treatment centers just get out of the business of trying to treat adolescents because it's such a wonky time of life with all the chemistry that goes on neurologically. I am currently, has anyone ever heard of Bright Futures? Anybody from the Ypsi area? No? Nobody's got young kids in the schools or in my programs. Okay, so I'm currently the director. I have been, this is my 9th year. I'm at Eastern Michigan University, and I run out-of-school time programs for kids who are in schools in Ypsilanti, Romulus, and Wayne Westland. Wayne Westland's my home base for K-12 education. I spent a big chunk of my career there. And I know a lot about these communities. And I know a lot about the recovering community, and so my worlds collide all the time. I know Claudia Black. She wrote this seminal work called "It Will Never Happen to Me." If any of you have an alcoholic parent, grew up in a family system of chemical dependency, I strongly recommend you read that book. I think people find themselves in that book in sometimes one role but multiple roles as she defines how families with chemical dependency sort of play out. There are these roles that people play, and we are going to talk about that today. But I put the picture up there because the truth is I saw her speak a million years ago. I had no gray hair. I'm positive the first time I heard her speak. But I have recently reconnected with her and had really the honor of spending some time with her and kind of revisiting all this. And so there's my one weekend of claim to fame when we were at the same conference speaking together. This is my family. So I'm going to talk about family, so I thought you should see my family. My parents are about to celebrate their 70th wedding anniversary, which means they've been married to the same person for 70 years. Which I think is astonishing. I mean, it's hard to pull off just being that old, right? And then just being with the same person. I don't know. It's fascinating and marvelous, and those were my roots. But I did manage. I have managed to find myself around a fair amount of alcoholism in different parts of families that I have found my way into, and so those are my kids. I put them up there. Each one of them has an alcoholic in their lives, and so this material is really relevant to them. And this is Herb and me in New York City reading the New York Times. Okay, some of you know Herb. I always put this picture in here because this is one of my students. You know, I told you I was in the alternative high school for a long time, and this is Katie with my permission, by the way, with her permission, by the way. This is her graduation. She's about 20-something and has 3 kids in this picture. And she finally graduated. Took her a long time. She has a lot of chemical dependency in her family. Her father's been in recovery for 20-some years. She was in Alateen. She has continued to do some work in 12-step recovery, and she herself is not an addict, but she has had a wonderful adult life. Pretty wonderful, challenged, but wonderful. Because, you know, she learned this stuff early on, and I told her I was going to put her picture up there because I went and wept at that graduation. You know, I know what it took her to get to that, given the challenges that she had. So I was taught by one of my mentors to always, when I speak and I share stories and I talk about what I've learned and what I know, to have the kid that reminds me of that in my mind's eye, and to carry that with me through the talk. So this is her. She's here, along with 2 other kids who you may get introduced to if I remember to talk about them. Okay, so there you have it. That's my background, and that's how I ended up here. I could never fill the shoes of Ron Harrison. Some of you knew him. He was a therapist in town. He gave this talk for decades, and he was a colleague and a good friend of mine, so I'm really honored to kind of carry on. And here we go. So this is the outline. We're going to do a little overview of chemical dependency. I'm going to keep this moving really fast, but if I say something and you really have a burning question, tonight we're going to try answering a few of those, unless it starts to slow the talk down too much. So we'll try it, and if it seems to be slowing things down, then I'll stop it and we'll wait to the end and see how much time we have to answer questions. Is that fair? So I'm going to be the timekeeper for all that, and there's a clock back there so I know what time it is. Okay, we're going to talk about the definition of family and really focus on the effects of chemical dependency on the family, and then talk a little bit about what people can do if they're affected by this disease, either themselves or people in their family or somebody who you're close with. And I've got a list of resources, and you have all my slides, so you'll have the information. Take notes if that helps you remember, so that's great. There's a lot of helping professionals out there. We're all trying to fix all this, right? So there's therapists. Yeah, I'm sure we have. How many students do we have here tonight? I see. Oh my gosh, it's so exciting. Social work? Nursing? Even more exciting, because the social work is always good. The nursing doesn't always get. That's fabulous. What about over here? Same? Everybody's in nursing? Social work. Anybody else in social work? Yeah, we got a few. That's great. Great. Okay. So we have lots of helping professionals, and I'm glad that some of you are here. Some of you are already in the professions, and some of you are training to be in those professions. And I think it's really important to learn about this because it affects so many people, and these people are always struggling and getting in trouble for their consequences to being an addict, and their consequences to being a family member of an addict. Now, I'm going to interchangeably talk about being addicted, and I don't really care what the substance is. That's another talk, seriously. So, I mean, if you want to learn about the chemistry and how maybe being a drug addict might be different from being an alcoholic, but the addicted brain, no matter what the substance is, behaves like an addicted brain, and that's the brain we're talking about tonight, okay? So I can't even be, I will not answer, because I'm not the authority to answer questions about, well, what about this drug, and what about how much alcohol is too much? I didn't study that to put it up here, because that's a different topic. So you'll hear me interchangeably say alcohol or drugs or addicted. It's all the same. It's that brain. I don't have one of those. Some of the people in this room, I think, have one of those. And they're really different. They're really different. So I'm gonna take this off because it's getting in my way. What is chemical dependency? The National Institute on Drug Abuse has a definition, and here it is for you. I'll read it. Addiction is a primary means like if you've got that, it's prime. So if you have that, something else, addiction is primary. It's hard to get to the other thing if you don't get to the addiction. So, for example, I know a physician who's a chronic pain doctor who deals with a lot of chronic pain patients who also have addiction, and you can't really treat the pain without treating the addiction. Like if you let the addiction go on, whether it's to nicotine, even nicotine, yes, or to any other substance, it interferes with treating other things. So it's primary. It's a chronic disease of brain reward. I told you, the addict's brain is different. Motivation, memory, and related circuitry. Their brains aren't wired like other people's brains. Dysfunction in these circuits leads to characteristic biological, psychological, social, and spiritual manifestations. It sounds really bad, doesn't it? Really bad disease. This is reflected in an individual pathologically pursuing reward and or relief by substance use and other behaviors. So the pathways to the reward and how people experience the reward from drugs and alcohol is really quite different from people who don't have addiction. So it's characterized by an inability to consistently abstain, impairment in behavioral control. Do these sound familiar? I mean, have people witnessed these in a neighbor, a friend, a colleague, a classmate in high school? Like I can go back and this kid, Carl, who I was in elementary school. In elementary school, we used to have these things, mimeographs. Anybody remember what a mimeograph is? A few people remember what a mimeograph is. There's a fluid that they use to make that print on the paper. You know, they turn the drum and papers would come flying out and they'd be full of that fluid. And he was always going, you know, with the paper. And we always just thought, he really likes the smell. But he also really liked alcohol. Which I found out later and crashed his car a lot as an adult, a lot. So, like, it's not easy to connect the dots when people are young, but lots of times this stuff gets triggered early on by all kinds of things. So, impairment in behavioral control and craving, diminished recognition of significant problems with one's behavior. So, it may look like everyone else can see the problem, but they can't see the problem. Interpersonal relationships, usually down the tubes, and a dysfunctional emotional response, or no emotional response, which is dysfunctional. Like other chronic diseases, it often involves cycles of relapse and remission. So in this realm, if you are a family member or have a friend or a colleague who's an addict who gets sober and then relapses, like that's really common. It's not everybody, but it's quite common. And I remember when I was running that treatment program, one of my mentors at the time, one of the kids relapsed, and they were teenagers, they were relapsing left and right. It just took a while to recognize each one, right? But early on when I was running the treatment program, and then this kid, I really liked relapsing, she said to me, you know, if you can't adjust to the fact that this disease is a relapsing disease, if people don't find long-term sobriety, it is the nature of the disease, and so in the community we see a lot of it, and it's painful to watch, very painful to watch. Without treatment or engagement in recovery activities, addiction is progressive and can result in disability or premature death, or imprisonment is also common, or being institutionalized. So basically what I've said is it's a disease. Now, how many of you have heard of cancer? Right? It's a disease. How many of you think that if you act just right, the person you know who's got cancer is going to get better? If you just act right, if you just do the right things, if you just say the right things, if you just think the right things, if you make the right meal, if you give them enough water to drink, they'll get better. You know. Right? No hands go up. Okay, this is a chronic illness, just like cancer. Okay. Thought I should tell you that. It has signs and symptoms. It's chronic, progressive, fatal. That's the basic definition of a disease. Those things. Signs and symptoms, chronic, progressive, fatal. Okay. So there are some things that happen. Like my kids in the school used to say, I don't have a problem with alcoholism. I can drink a fifth and drive a car and know what I'm doing. And I go, oh my God, that's a really bad sign. Because what is that called? Tolerance, right? No normal person ever gets to be able to drink a fifth and not pass out. Only someone who builds tolerance is going to drink a fifth of liquor and not pass out. there are withdrawal symptoms. So somebody who's addicted, if they stop using the substance, crazy things, physical things start to happen. And people crave drugs, and physically they don't feel normal without them. And sort of what happens is when they first start doing drugs, I don't think I have this in there. Okay, when they first start doing drugs, it feels good. They get high and then they come down. And they get high and then they come down a little farther. And then as they get high, eventually they go up, down, up, down, up. Now, just getting to be normal is the up, and everything else is down. So it's got this weird, progressive, jagged thing it does. Frequent intoxication. Usually people who are chemically dependent can't stop. They just keep going until there isn't any left, or they can't do it anymore, or somebody makes them stop. There are behavior changes while using. Can somebody cite what some behavior changes are when people are using what I do? What do you hear? If you walk into, all you have to do is walk into a bar. What do you see in a bar? What's that?
Overly nice.
Oh, people are really nice, really friendly. Their social barriers are down. Yeah, what else? Loud.
Angry sometimes.
Sometimes angry. So, or just some extreme emotion. Really raucous laughter, or really angry. Crazy stuff. Okay. So there's frequent intoxication. They can't stop. They have blackouts. So I want to just quickly say what the difference is between passing out and a blackout. Most of you may already know this. Passing out is when you're out cold on the floor or sleeping in bed and you're out. That's passing out. A blackout is you're acting perfectly normal. You might be acting drunk, but normal, drunk. Awake, alert, as if you're present. But your brain has a switch that has gone off, and you are not going to remember anything from it. That is a blackout. So if you've ever talked to an alcoholic who, in recovery, not in recovery, but somebody who wakes up the next morning and says, "Tell me what I did last night," that's a blackout. Oh, you were? Why are you asking? You were there. We watched a movie. Right? They don't remember a thing. And things start to happen. They start to miss work. They start to not show up when they're supposed to for family events. They're just, things happen. And then there's all these other things like legal troubles, drug taking in larger amounts than intended, and then lots of drug seeking and like spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to get the drugs or the alcohol. Where's the next thing going to come from? Inability to cut back. Wake up in the morning, I'm not going to use today, I'm not going to use today, I'm not going to use today, and then they use. That's a real common scenario. A lot of time spent, like I said, obtaining drugs and alcohol, and they continue to use it, and this is the one that was the biggest measure. If you get it, if you get a DUI and then you go to the bar on the weekend again, that's probably a bad sign. So if you have a severe negative consequence from your use and then you use again, that's usually a symptom of alcoholism or chemical dependency. And then there's the psychological things. A lot of attitude, weird attitude stuff, a lot of not normal emotional responses and relationships. Moody, very, very, very moody. Even when they get sober, alcoholics tend to be moody if they don't have something that they're doing to maintain their sobriety. They think they can't do life without drugs. Sober people, when they first get sober, their biggest worry is I'm never going to have fun again. I can't exist. Like, how am I going to do this? It just, in their mind, that can't happen. And then, their primary relationship, and I guess this is important news, but not very good news if you're in a primary relationship with an alcoholic, that really they may be your primary person, but their primary thing is the drugs, and everything else comes after that. And that is a tough one to deal with as a person in the family, and painful, very painful. So here's about this being chronic and what we're dealing with. And the reason I go over all this is, so look, I've been around a lot of active addicts and then a lot of addicts in recovery. And I know that the fact that I'm really clear that chemical dependency is this disease with these signs and symptoms and all these, all this chronicity, that I can be really clear that I'm not responsible for it. And I can respect that disease and just understand that it's an illness and it needs to be treated. Which is really different from, I'm a bad person. If I were a better person, the person wouldn't be getting drunk. If I just like with the cancer example, if I just made the right meal, if I made the bedroom look nice and neat every morning so that when they came home there were no mess. I mean, anything. You can cook up all these reasons, all these ways that you might be able to affect it, but you can't. So the symptoms come up and they arise, they last over time. It does interrupt the developmental cycle, so if any of you have an adolescent in your midst, or are an adolescent, or were recently an adolescent using, here's what happens. Your social development just stops when you start using. So if a kid starts at 9 or 10 years old, and I had a lot of kids who were using since they were like 9, 10, 11 years old, that is where they are at developmentally and socially until they get sober. So that, that evolution, especially during adolescence, is just arrested. And I had a kid get sober and come back and spend a lot of time sharing with me what it was like. So he was in high school, he was away for a year, he came back sober, he sat me down and he talked about how painful it was to try and figure out how to date. Because his first drug was when he was 6. And so he had missed out on his social development, and now he was 16 or 17 and didn't have a clue. And when people talked about it, it just didn't even make sense to him. So he had a lot of catching up to do. And he did. I don't know that developmentally alcoholics ever totally catch up and be at, like you put a 40-year-old recovering person with a 40-year-old person who doesn't have alcoholism. They kind of look a little different because they had to do this catching up if they started young. But they're people learn to function and they become highly functional and have really positive, great lives. Over time, using just becomes routine. It's just what they do. This is a progressive disease. It has stages. In the early stages, you may just see a little bit of some of the things that I talked about. In the middle stages, the relationships and a person's work life and, the things that keep a person stable and sort of part of a community, those things start to fall apart. And then those symptoms that I talked about that are really chronic and very, very obvious, once you can see that chronicity repeated over and over again, they're probably in late stages. This is fatal. I've been to a lot of funerals for addicts, mostly people who relapse, and it's really, it's a tough disease. And if it's left untreated, it kills. I'm not into that hyperbole that they did when I was growing up about drugs. But truthfully, untreated alcoholism and drug addiction often results in death. It may be a car accident, right? And it may even be recorded as a car accident and not, as a result of addiction. But the person was drunk or stoned when they drove their car into a tree. Those kinds of things happen. Could be during violence while they're, burglarizing, trying to steal to get some drugs or some money for alcohol, or a homicide because of something gone bad, or an overdose. I mean, all these different ways that it's fatal. A lot of suicides, a lot of depression for people when they're using. Okay, so the addict brain might not actually look like this, but it's definitely not like my brain. I know I'm not an addict. I tested some things out. I'm not an addict, and I've been around people who are, and their processing is different than our processing, and there's a lot of neuroscience around it that explains exactly how things are processed differently when they ingest a substance. So again, it's a disease, there are symptoms, it's a brain disease because it's about how the brain processes the substances. So what's missing is that it's a family disease. That doesn't always get talked about. There's a lot less discussion in the media about it. I mean, there was a decade and a half where there was just so much discussion and so much teaching going on, and now there's just so little of it. But it's a family disease, and it takes hostages. People don't mean to be taken hostage, and the alcoholic isn't intentionally taking you hostage. The alcoholic is being an alcoholic, and in those conditions, the family members are taken hostage. We're going to talk a little bit about that. This is a quote from, so a lot of alcoholics and drug addicts to go to Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. I will be quoting some of the 12-step literature, and I'll tell you why. I think it's important. I think there are many ways to go about things and go about working on things, whether you do it through a religious institution and working with clergy, working with counselors, working with therapists. There's also 12-step programs, and there's just a lot of knowledge and a lot of history in 12-step programs of recovery. And so I'm going to draw from that literature here and there. And this is from the book Alcoholics Anonymous, which is the primary text that the alcoholics use in AA meetings. The years of living with an alcoholic is almost sure to make any wife or child neurotic. The entire family is to some extent ill. So that was written like in the 40s. 30s. I think the 30s. I mean, so like early on, even before there was as much research as there is today, there was recognition that the alcoholic and their behavior and the consequences to the family made the family system quite dysfunctional. So, with that picture, Cosby's way more interesting than it used to be. Okay. So, family is a primary social group consisting of parents and their offspring, the principal function of which is provision for its members. And those are all sort of, does anybody know what that one is? Who knows? I just left it up there because the first time I did this slide, nobody knew anything I put up there because they were all from my childhood. Okay, so put your hand up. Who knows?
Ozzy and Harriet.
The Cleavers.
Leave it to me. It's the Cleavers. It's the Cleavers. Yeah, and the Cosbys, and then this is Family Guy, right? No, yeah. Yeah, right? I haven't watched it in a while. Okay, so that's sort of like these are your traditional families, but we don't look at families the same way anymore, and I want to honor that because really a family unit is the unit in which you live, as a family. And families there are many different kinds of families. I had kids with 2 moms, kids with 2 dads, kids who lived with their grandparents, kids who lived with aunts and uncles and had lived with them most of their childhood and growing up time. So the family is whoever is doing that parenting work with you and being your siblings or no siblings, but there are many, many different configurations. And sometimes when kids don't even have that, they make their own, right? So I know that when I was working the alternative program, I had at times kids who were homeless and familyless, but they figured it out. And I mean, whether they joined a gang or they joined somebody else's family, they always seemed pretty able to figure it out because people need to belong. People need to belong. So common features are in a family, people have unique roles. Some people have shared roles, so sometimes parenting is shared, sometimes it's single parent. There are rules. Sometimes kids are really clear. Yeah, my mom says, or my dad says, or my auntie says, but sometimes they're unspoken rules. And those unspoken rules tend to be really common in alcoholics' family systems. There's sets of values and beliefs and a shared history of some sort. And there's systems, right? So if you have one person in that family system who's an addict and they fall off, the dynamics of the system can't possibly stay the same. They become emotionally unavailable. They are sometimes physically unavailable, often. So that's what changes. And I just want you to know that that ripple in the pond moves out and affects lots of people and lots of things, as can a person's recovery if one person in the family system decides that they're going to take care of themselves and they're going to find a way to not be a victim, that they also create a ripple in that family system. So when the person becomes the addict and they're, you're dealing with all this chaos, the roles shift, the responsibilities change. I had kids who didn't come to school because they were responsible for younger siblings. If the younger sibling got sick, well, they stayed home, right? We have a kid right now whose parents were going to homeschool him because his mom she actually has MS, but she needed full-time care. So they were just going to keep the kid home to take care of mom so dad could go to work. This is what happens in family systems when there's illness. She also has a chronic illness, right? The rules that were set are often broken, and the values and beliefs are turned on their heads. I've heard a lot of open talks. I mean, you hear these people say, I can't believe that I stole. Like, I knew not to steal. So addicts find themselves doing things that they know are wrong, but they do them anyways. That's addiction. They lose sight of history and denial sets in. Oh, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. So it changes how it feels to be in the family. It changes how it really affects how people communicate. How family members relate to each other and get along or don't get along is very affected. How family members deal with problems and conflicts or don't deal with problems and conflicts anymore, right? So that all shifts. The alcoholic is like a tornado roaring his way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead, affections have been uprooted, selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. That kind of says it all. So what kinds of things are happening at this point? Well, suddenly they end up in the ER, an addict ends up in the ER, they overdose, they had an accident, they cut their finger, because they're too stoned to cut with a knife. I mean, it can be anything, right? Any kind of an accident. Lose their job, that can happen. Get arrested, that can happen. And surely a lot of car accidents. And this is just, these are the common ones. There's a whole lot of uncommon ones. I have a friend who's in recovery, drove his car off a cliff. That's not so common. Landed on the ledge just like in the Looney Tune cartoons, and then crawled up to the road and continued to drink for 10 more years. Tough people, these addicts. The chemically dependent person is not able to live up to their commitments. So here's an example. I remember one of the kids telling me that the dad, who was the addict, was supposed to pick him up after an art club that they were staying for after school, and it was winter, so it was really dark. The kid waited and waited and waited and waited and waited and waited. He was in like 5th or 6th grade. And then finally broke the rule because you're not allowed to walk home in the dark. You wait for a parent to come pick you up. And he walked home in the dark crying the whole way and then just wept, all night because nobody came to pick him up. Well, the dad was stoned and didn't remember. Just didn't remember. Didn't remember even that he offered. He's probably in some sort of blackout. Didn't remember he offered to pick him up. That is very common, those kinds of things. Thus, the broken promises and unfilled expectations. And there's this phenomenon where you just get this glimmer of hope because maybe the person's just all of a sudden they're just really present. They're looking kind of good for a day or two. And so, it's getting better, it's getting better. And then the cycle repeats itself. Never less. So constant disappointment, especially children who live in families where there's chemical dependency who begin to recognize that adults cannot be trusted because they can't be counted on for anything. They only need to learn that from one adult to generalize that to everybody. So the alcoholic becomes the center of attention for all things, and all things kind of dance around the alcoholic, but usually there's not much discussion about it. There's a lot of denial and shame, inconsistency, insecurity and fear, anger and hatred, guilt and blame, resentments develop. What a mess, right? What a mess. Family full of resentments, all the rules are being broken, the adult is not accountable, and they're sick. And all this because they have a chronic progressive disease, right? So until that's interrupted, that continues, and the family continues to be taken hostage, unless at least one person reaches out and gets some help. Sometimes that's all it takes. That doesn't mean the alcoholic will get sober, but the family system can improve. Brings misunderstandings, fierce resentments, financial insecurity. That's a big one, financial insecurity. A lot of stories about financial insecurity because drugs and alcohol are real expensive if you use a lot of them. And if you lose your job because you're using a lot of them now, that complicates it. Disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents. Anyone can increase the list. And again, this is from the Alcoholics Anonymous big book. They don't paint a pretty picture, but it's pretty honest. Trying to convince an alcoholic that they're an alcoholic, or to point out what's going on with them, is a little bit like saying to them, this is an apple. Right? They can't see what's going on. So there's no linear way to get this to work. I find this fascinating, but you can't use any kind of rational thought. Blue is red, pink is white. You can't use any rational thought to get them back to this is a banana. Because they can't see it. They can't see it. If they think this is an apple, it's an apple. This works now. Okay, so is it the battery? Who knows? All right. So they're filled with anger and hatred, and it's coming from the alcoholic, and it's coming from the family members. It's coming from all sides. It just builds up. There's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of blaming. There's a lot of guilt and a lot of blaming. And alcoholics are really good at this, pointing at you. And even though when they get sober, people talk about, but there's three pointing back at them, it is nasty when they're pointing at you and they figure out every single time how to take what they did and make you responsible for it. It's amazing. It's how their brains work. Weird brains. There's a lot of embarrassment. I mean, this is not that unfamiliar, falling asleep in your food with a cig in your mouth. It's really gross. But it's, there's just a lot of shame and embarrassment that comes with the behavior they do. And there's sort of this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing. There's when if you love the alcoholic, if it's your dad or your husband or your mom or your sister or your best friend, and you just really love them, and when they're sober and they're present, before they get really, really sick, they're sober and they're present, they're wonderful people, and you just love them. You love the person they really are, but you hate what they become when they're using. That's the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. I think it's a good analogy because really when they're using, you can say, oh, that's not really them. That is what they turn into when their disease is active. Love the person, hate the disease. Now, I told a young man who was asking me for some advice about this. His father's been drinking for a really long time, forever. And I said, well, Gabe, really, maybe you just need to, love your dad, but hate the disease. He said, but he's not giving me much material to work with, right? Because he hasn't gotten sober. So he's been drunk most of this kid's life. And for the family, because we'll talk about the family rules, we talk about the elephant in the living room, right? So like this thing is present in the household, it's around all the time, it's really hard to deal with, it's pretty horrible, but it's so embarrassing and so shameful, and the rule is you don't talk about it. So the alcoholism just sits there, it's happening, but nobody's talking about it. So now for young children, they think they're losing it, Well, maybe this is normal. Well, maybe this is how it's supposed to be. Well, maybe this is okay. Well, maybe I should talk about it. Maybe I shouldn't talk. I guess I shouldn't talk about it, right? So resentment, which is brooding, and there's more and more and more of it from the family, is like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. Because all that happens is for the people who are resentful is they're getting sicker and sicker, but it doesn't make it go away. It won't make... Being resentful doesn't make addiction go away any more than it makes a cold go away or cancer. So there are family rules that come with this disease. Now here's where Claudia Black's work and Sharon Wegscheider-Cruz, another person who I think is referenced in the back. There are some rules. One of them is don't talk. So I don't know if you've ever been around a family system where somebody's an addict, but like maybe the junior in high school is the one who's doing all the drinking, and there's another kid who's in 9th grade and comes in and says to the teacher, I can't do anything, my brother's always drunk, and kind of spills the beans and goes home and just gets backhanded as soon as they find it. So the school calls home and says, we're concerned because, and then the parent just backhands the kid. The kid is never going to talk about that again, right? So that's the don't talk rule, how it plays out. There's a don't trust rule, because what happened to this kid who was taking the art class, right? The trusted adult was supposed to pick him up, didn't pick him up. Well, what's the lesson there? I'm not going to trust an adult. Just because they said they would do it, that doesn't mean they're going to do it. So in my alternative high school, we had almost 100% of the kids with zero trust for adults walking through the door when they first came in. It was a tough place to be for a while. And then the other one is don't feel. And the don't feel one is also interesting because addicts in general, aside from being able to be angry, they're not in touch with their emotions. They may be having them, but they don't know they're having them. They can't articulate that they're having them. They don't know how to identify how they're feeling. But what happens is for the people in the family, particularly, again, the child goes to school and comes home. They get a B on their report card. The mom's drunk. She says, how come you got a B? I thought you were going to get an A. And the kid says, I'm so sorry, but I didn't know, and I'm so sorry. And they get backhanded because they're identifying a feeling, I'm sorry. But they get backhanded because they or they get yelled at, or they get reprimanded, or they get ignored, or they don't get dinner. Something irrational happens because the addict did something irrational. Or they start laughing at a family gathering because they're really happy about something. What are you laughing at? Right? So whenever an emotion, a strong emotion, is shown by somebody in the family, oftentimes the addict will call them out on that feeling. Too happy, too sad, too angry, too expressive. So they learn to just push it down. Kids who grew up in these families learn to push their feelings down. Good feelings, bad, doesn't matter what they are. Happy feelings, sad feelings, mad feelings. Actually, the mad ones are the ones that come out. The mad and the anger tend to be hard to squish. So you ask a kid who's in an alcoholic family, well, how are you today? Fine. Well, I know, but, how are you feeling? Fine. Right, because they learn not to identify their feelings, because when they do, if they're too open about how they feel, too mad, too sad, too glad, they're reprimanded. So there are ways that family members just kind of have these responses to reduce the stress. One is to ignore the problem behaviors, conflict, pain, they just ignore it. They use defense mechanisms. That's both the chemically dependent person and the people in the family. So denial, minimization. Denial, it's not that bad. That's minimalization. Denial, I didn't do it. I don't think it's happening. I don't think it's really a problem. That's denial. Minimization, oh, he doesn't drink that much. She doesn't use that much. She only uses on weekends. Approval seeking, a lot of approval seeking, and victimization. The family members see themselves as victims. And taking on new roles is another one. And whenever the family goes out of whack, then different people will switch their roles around to try and stabilize what's going on, like having kids take care of kids, or protecting the family secret in any way they know how. So Claudia Black developed these family roles and talks about these in her book: the hero, the scapegoat, the lost child, the mascot, and the chief enabler. So imagine that anybody can be any one of these roles or more, okay? So maybe in one situation a kid is the hero, but in another situation the kid's a scapegoat. That can happen. Maybe it's a big family, everybody just picks a role, falls into a role. The hero, so I think you hear a lot about it, like Clinton had an alcoholic parent, right? He's a family hero because he did become president of the United States, even though he had an alcoholic parent, right? That's pretty great. So there are lots of valedictorians, lots of high-functioning honor society kids who their role in the family is to look good. These are kids who have a real tough time with perfectionism and trying to get it right and getting all A's, and really incredibly driven young people. The high achievers, they excel at everything, very busy, very, very busy with school and achieving and learning. Almost never says no. These are people who want you happy with them. They're very responsive to an adult, okay, and they can be incredibly controlling because they're controlling to have the outcome of being the hero, so they have to kind of control their environment to get to that place. They're very anxious, they feel inadequate. I mean, so that's what you see on the outside, and then on the inside you see the opposite, right? There's all this insecurity and feeling not worthy and shaming, lonely. They feel real low. There's a lot of loneliness. Kids who are high achieving children of alcoholics talk a lot about how lonely they are. And as an adult, they have this really strong sense of control. So if you're around a lot of people who are recovering in like Al-Anon, which is the 12-step program for family members of addicts and alcoholics, you're around a whole lot of people who have a whole lot of control issues. And it's one of the things that people in that environment, in that 12-step environment, recognize pretty early on. It's a tough one to change because the need to control is really strong. The need for approval. These high-functioning hero kids are approval junkies. You see them in the schools. They're really easy to recognize in the schools if you know the model. Now, that doesn't mean that every valedictorian has an alcoholic parent, right? This just means that some of the kids who have an alcoholic parent do this behavior. Some will become, the top tier kids in their class. What else? They feel overly responsible. These are kids who are so responsible. So if you're a teacher in a classroom, it's a great kid to have in your classroom because you can give them responsibility to get stuff done in the classroom, to organize the classroom, to get a team of kids to do something there, and they're just ready and able and willing, and I'm going to get an A, right? And that's how they roll. And they offer the family a sense of being okay because they look really good on paper, right? They look really good on paper. And they become CEOs a lot. They do. They become CEOs and creative geniuses. There's a lot of children of alcoholics in writing, in comedy, and performance-based. Tons of it in the performing arts. Here's what we got at the alternative program was kids who were scapegoats. So, this is a really easy role for them to develop because they take the attention off the addict and the alcoholic by acting out. So now if the family's having a problem, they're the problem. And now nobody's paying attention to the addict. So they test the limits, they break the rules. They're incredibly fun, by the way. It's my favorite kids, aren't these kids? They get in a lot of trouble. They can be pretty aggressive. They're also kids who take a lot of risks, and they become themselves often substance abusers. A lot of anger, a lot of confusion, and as an adult, they often are the ones who become the addicts. That role. Now, here's the thing: if children of alcoholics are going to have some predisposition to becoming an alcoholic, so I don't really know that the research has been done to hook the scapegoat behavior, but the scapegoat behavior looks a lot like a little itty-bitty alcoholic acting out, right? And then those kids tend to use. So what we might be seeing, in addition to the scapegoating, is just a kid who's an alcoholic who hasn't had their first drink, right? They have a lot of problems until they get help. Now the other role that is fascinating is the lost child, and this is the kid who knows how to disappear and stay out of the way. Kind of an obvious role, right? Like if I'm just quiet, I go to my room, I don't talk back, I don't ask for anything, I just go about my business, get things done, and I had a lot of these kids too when I was teaching. They're very quiet. They kind of do a lot of daydreaming and kind of shutting out what's going on, and these are kids who are pretty lonely and fearful. And as an adult, these kids, and again, none of this is fixed. It all is very dynamic, but there's a lot of depression for kids who grow up being the ones who are kind of hiding out. When they're finally getting older and a little more mature, getting some hormones, the depression is a place that many of them end up. And they self-medicate for that depression. And they offer the family a sense of relief and success because they're no trouble. Oh, she's such a good little girl. She never gets in trouble. She's no problem. She doesn't ask for anything. And then there's the mascot. Now this one is great. These people all become comedians. And the reason is because when things get really tense in the household, this is the kid who will just like moon everybody, or do an arm fart, or anything to get the attention off the tension of the setting, what's going on with the alcoholic or the addict, or a fight between the parents because mom's drunk, whatever it is. They'll do something really funny, and it just breaks the tension, even if for only a few minutes. In the classroom, this is the kid who, as a teacher, you think you got everybody's attention, and then all of a sudden this kid just busts out with something really funny. And they often get in trouble for it, though I used to praise my mascots because I think humor is a good way to get through to people. So I didn't allow that to be a negative behavior, but I had to work it so that they could stand up in front of the class and tell a joke before we get started. And they loved it. They love to perform, the mascots. So they're class clowns. They seek a lot of attention with humor, a lot of anxiety. They measure their self-worth by how other people see them and whether or not everybody's laughing at their jokes and their behaviors. And they tend to have the problems I was talking about in school because they tell these funny things but probably don't. Their timing's probably... It's really good if they were being a comedian, but not really good if they're being a student. Does that make sense? And they are the life of the party. Like, everybody loves the mascots, and you probably know some. I mean, if you give yourself some time after this talk to think through who are the people in your life who just make you laugh, just at the right time. And they seem to be so natural at it. They might be the child of an alcoholic. Again, not all funny people grew up in alcoholic families, but a whole lot of them did. Then there's the chief enabler. Oh, that's me. So before I got trained in all of this, I was trained to be a special education teacher of emotionally impaired children, and I enabled the heck out of my students. It turned out, especially in the middle school, that they were all getting stoned on the weekends, but I thought that they just needed some extra time to study on Friday so they didn't come to school, but really they were out getting high, starting their weekend early. And so I made sure that the tests that were given on Friday, because they were special needs students, were given to them on Monday. Well, they gave them to me to give to them, right? I did all kinds of those kinds of needs. These were special needs students, and so they get special adaptation. And I became their chief enabler for all the right reasons, by the way. My motives were pure. I just didn't understand what I was doing. Once I got trained in this, I stopped doing those behaviors, but it took a long time to create an alternative set of behaviors. In a family, it's kind of the same thing. It's the person in the family who calls in sick for the addict who can't go to work because they're laid out in the bed and they can't get up. It's the person who, when the addict loses their job, goes out and gets a job to support the family. And the addict can just not work because now somebody's taken over doing that. It's the parent who calls in sick for their kid because their kid's hungover in the morning and can't go to school, or calls in and says, my kid can't take the test today. They makes up some excuse, but really the kid didn't study because they didn't even come home that night. Right? So that parents become chief enablers for their kids. So it takes on all kinds of forms, but there's usually one in a family system or in a school setting or in a work setting, right? Because there are different communities of people. And this is the person who shelters and shields the using family member from the consequences of their use. And they are angry, hurt. I mean, it's resentful. It's like when these kids would come in and they weren't fixed, and I thought that I had really put a lot of time in. They should be already acting better, right? And I'd be really hurt and I'd be really resentful that they weren't listening to me, or that they'd tell me they weren't going to use it for the weekend. They were going to knock it off for the weekend and come in Monday and be prepared, and then they didn't even show up on Monday. Well, that's because they were addicts. It was because they were sick, not because they were bad. So in a family, this offers the family a sense of stability and protection. Because don't worry, because she'll jump in there and fix it. I don't have to worry about it because she's going to take care of it. And that's for the children in the system who are kind of acting wacky because the system's so out of whack with all these rules and behaviors. So 1 in 4 kids lives in a home where alcoholism or alcohol abuse is present. Might be a little higher. In some communities it might be a little lower, but that's about the average. That was done by the, so there's an Adult Children of Alcoholics, a national group, NICOA, that gathers those statistics. And then, you know, children in chemically dependent homes have all these potential outcomes. Does it happen to everybody? No, but 3 times more likely to be verbally, physically, or sexually abused. Makes sense, right? So there's, you know, when you go to 12-step meetings for people who are from those family systems, there's a lot of stories of sexual abuse, lots. And lots of stories of physical and verbal abuse. And again, there's no excusing the behavior, but there is a reason for the behavior, which is not an excuse, but the reason is that the person's really sick. And this is some of the behaviors. Remember I talked, the addicts and alcoholics, when they're really super active and they're far along in their disease, they make very bad choices and they act on impulse and then they don't even know they did it the next day. That's the disease of alcoholism. Kids are 4 times more likely to be neglected, and they're 4 times more likely to develop their own chemical dependency problems. So, you know, you hear a lot of open AA talks, and the guys say, well, my dad was an alcoholic, and my grandfather and his 3 brothers were an alcoholic, and the 3 brothers had 4 girls who were alcoholic. I mean, you know, it does permeate the family. It seems to be passed on. And kids from the families, I mean, we've talked about this. They have emotional problems, physical and health problems because they're neglected. And oftentimes they have learning difficulties, which is why I think that as a teacher of emotionally impaired kids, I had like this very, very disproportionate number of kids who were children of alcoholics labeled as special education because of how it manifested in their lives. But they weren't really emotionally impaired. They were really in these dysfunctional family systems, and that was the impairment. And that's actually how I landed in this area, is because I had to find another way to work with these students because they weren't emotionally impaired. They were damaged by a family system. If I didn't understand that, I couldn't help them. Well, obviously, I tried to help them, right? I gave them the test on Monday. Big help. Now, this is the other thing that happens with children of alcoholics when they grow up. They can be a young woman who grew up in with an alcoholic dad, or a young man who grew up with an alcoholic mom will be in a room full of people looking for somebody to dance with, and they will find the one person who's an alcoholic. Some of you probably have done that. Okay. And then they'll get married and start the whole thing all over again. There are consequences. I talked about kids some kids become harmfully involved, and I added a few slides in there because the first year I did this, I didn't talk so much about what if your kid has a problem. I talked more about the system and what if the parent, or the grandparent. This is another interesting one, just for your information, because I don't know anybody, so I don't know who's here and what you bring to the table here. But I know there's a book out, which I haven't seen in a while. It might even be out of print, but you can find it because we have the internet now, about grandchildren of alcoholics. Because there's, we have people sometimes in the 12-step meetings who don't have an active alcoholic in their family system, but a grandparent was an alcoholic, and then their parent grew up in that system and then just passed on all this secrecy and all these family rules and kind of had the same dynamics without the alcohol. So if you're a nurse or a social worker, like, that can happen. I've seen it happen. So let's flip it a little bit and say, what if your child has a problem with drugs or alcohol? Because perhaps some of you came here wondering about that. So I actually went to a place and gathered together some parents of kids who were addicts and asked them what they would tell all of you. So that's what this is. This is a little bit of qualitative research that I did in the local community. And this is what they said. It's horrible to have an alcoholic husband, but it's way more difficult and confusing to have an alcoholic child. Because you're the parent, so like, when's it enabling and when's it parenting, right? Al-Anon helped me in the process of helping get him in treatment without blame or shame. I had an interventionist who really helped. So there are interventionists around, and Dawn Farm I think they have lists, or they would know who those people are. Says, give them the dignity to experience the consequences, and as parents, recognize the consequences as good news. So this is from somebody whose kid got busted and got some really serious legal consequences as a minor. And this person was so excited that they got arrested. But, if you don't understand that might be the thing that interrupts your kids using because you weren't able to. So sometimes just letting your kids have the consequences is really important. So the definition of enabling that I like to use is getting between a person and the consequences of the choices they make. Somebody decides to spend their whole paycheck on alcohol and can't pay their rent. If I pay their rent, I just got between them and the consequences of choosing to spend all their money on alcohol instead of on their rent. So I don't pay their rent because that's enabling. So it's a good, I love that formula because it's really simple, right? So somebody who's an active addict says to you, I need help with whatever, and you sort of put it through that mill and you say, well, if I give them help with that, am I getting between them and the consequences that they're drinking or drugging? And if the answer is yes, then doing it is enabling. Here's some more. Kicking her out saved her life. Someone told me to go to Al-Anon. It took me 6 months from the time of kicking her out to go back to Al-Anon. Then I got healthy. In the middle of all of it, the important thing for me was recognizing that when things unfold, the consequences of their use and action, those consequences are good news. So that's a repeated bit. I don't need to make the connections for them. Those consequences are motivators. From a recovering young son, and this was a mom who went and talked to her kid, told him she was going to meet with me about this. She said, God and mom are alike. They both never turned their back on me. So this was a mom. She didn't turn her back on her kid, but she didn't enable him. She gave him choices, like you have this consequence. You can choose to get help or not. And if you choose not, then I'm not involved. So is there hope? Yeah, there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of hope. So first of all, you need to know if you're in one of these systems, it's important to develop an understanding that this is a disease, and there are 3 C's that come along with it. You didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it, because it's a disease. You didn't cause the disease, you can't control the disease, and you're surely not going to be the one who cures the disease. Really, mostly it's about getting out of the way. Now that's kind of what it feels like before you have any kind of recovery or support or help. You got the whole world on your shoulders, kind of willingly, because you don't know that there are other options. But the truth is there's a lot of people. There's helping professionals. There are 12-step programs. There are a lot of places to go to ask for help. And all you need to be willing to do is change everything. Not too hard. Actually, it's really hard. So it's a systemic disease. It needs systemic treatment. The family has choices and can break the cycle and the norms, the unhealthy ones. And it doesn't matter why the rules were developed, they don't have to be maintained. Now, when they develop, they serve a purpose. They actually probably protect the kids. When the kids develop those rules, it's for their own protection. But at a certain point, it stops being protective and it starts being not normal. I mean, not normal in a way that interferes with their adult life. So the alcoholic may find it hard to establish friendly relationships with their children. They can't seem to forgive and forget. They're really a pain in the neck. In time, they will see he is a new man, and in their own way, they will let him know it. From this point on, progress will be rapid. So this is about recovery. If an alcoholic or addict gets sober, like the beginning, things don't feel that different. But as time progresses, things get different. If you're the parent, seek professional help. Go to some Al-Anon meetings. There are Family Anonymous meetings. You can look it up in a phone book anywhere in the world and find those meetings, and I mean literally anywhere in the world. So if you're somewhere where they don't speak English, it might be in another language, but those people will welcome you in, and if there's somebody who speaks English, they'll translate for you. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Learn about codependency, learn about enabling, learn not to enable. Because the one thing that I can do, that I know I can do, is nothing. If I could just do nothing, in many of the cases that I was confronted with, things would have been better off for the act because they would have suffered consequences. So enabling, again, is standing between a person and his or her consequences for the choices they make, doing something for someone, something he or she should be doing for themselves, and engaging in actions that ultimately perpetuate. So this is the hard thing to grasp, you know. You think you're helping, but really what you're doing is the disease feeds on what you're doing and continues and it grows. That disease will, the enabling allows that person to continue to be active in their disease and for that disease to progress. So here's a little chunk of wisdom from Al-Anon. We who live or have lived with the problem of alcoholism understand as perhaps few others can. We too are lonely and frustrated, but in Al-Anon we discover that no situation is really hopeless and that it's possible to find contentment, even happiness, whether the alcoholic is still drinking or not. That is what they tell you when you get to Al-Anon. I am not a therapist, so I don't talk about therapy, but there is therapy. And therapy is a really good place to go if you've got a complex system that you're trying to understand and free yourself from. You can get one of these at the drugstore. Anybody know what that is? Q-tip. I use that a lot. I carry them around. I give them to my staff. I say, quit taking it personally. Because when people who are sick in their disease, or when they sort of lash out at you, it's almost never about you. It's almost always about them. So if you can learn to not take that stuff personally and just figure out what you can do with your own actions and attitudes, that really saves a lot of energy and hassle. The family situation is bound to improve as we apply, this is again a little bit of Al-Anon, as we apply the Al-Anon ideas, which by the way are the same 12 steps that they use in AA. It's a spiritual program but not a religious program. I'm not going to get too into that, but without such spiritual help, living with an alcoholic is too much for most of us. Our thinking becomes, this is the reason I put this in here. Our thinking becomes distorted by trying to force solutions, and we become irritable and unreasonable without knowing it. So when we live in these systems and we're trying to force a solution because we think we can be helpful to make this chemical dependency tone down or go away, we become the ones with distorted thinking. Because that would be like saying you could do that with cancer or a virus. So it's work. The battle against alcoholism has become the basis for many of our relationships. Putting an end to this battle requires completely, remember I told you I have to change everything, completely redefining what we believe about ourselves, others, and our relationships. So this is the most important thing I can tell you. Besides the piece about you can only control your actions and your attitudes, which I think is so cool. Because I used to think I could control a lot more than that. I was always really tired. But if I can share one thing, it's love the person and hate the disease. Nobody chooses to be an alcoholic or a drug addict, like nobody chooses to have cancer. Like nobody chooses to have cerebral palsy or any other kind of chronic progressive thing. And there is light at the end of the tunnel. You've been a great audience. Thank you.